Hello, Ken Spriggs here with a one video build of a figure, a bust that I got last year from Wonderfest of a figure. It's just the main reason I want to try to paint it, and I'll show you here in a minute, is that I want to try some of the techniques that I learned at Wonderfest as far as painting flesh, getting realistic flesh tones and different blemishes, things like that, and also painting the hair. And this figure is sizable enough that I can do that. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I'm starting a new project. This will be a fairly short one of this figure right here, which is called Charge from Filmy's Girls. Those are logos right there. Futuristic retro. Really cool figure. I actually won this at Wonderfest last year. I didn't want it. It was an entry. They had a drawing for different things, and you entered. You purchased entries, and you put it in. And this is one of the ones that I had put some entries in, and I had gotten it. Really cool figure. There's two versions of it. There's this one here, which is just the bust, and then there's a full version of her sitting at a makeup table and getting ready, that kind of thing, with the bandages on. They also included a little hairspray can and the little troll doll that has her hair. But very nicely sculpted figure for sure. It has this cool looking stone base. It has her torso. Really nice little detailing with the stitches. Even some of them you can see underneath them, like they actually are raised up. Really cool. A little bit of bandages at her waist. And then she goes into here. And then the really cool head with the awesome hair. Beautiful face sculpt. Goes up on top. Like that. Get on there. Come on. Turn around. Right like that. Okay. She'll stay. Yep, she'll stay. Okay, here we go. So very, very cool. The main reason I decided on this one, I looked at a couple different models in my stash, but I saw two really, really good tutorials, demos on painting at Wonderfest, and I showed some stills from it, talked about them. One of them was painting realistic skin, which she has a lot of, obviously, and one of them was painting hair, which she also has a lot of. So I'm going to follow some of their techniques, and I'm going to go over them as I do it and kind of explain what they did and try some of these and see if I can come up with some different ideas. Now, she doesn't have normal flesh tones, of course, because she's a sexy takeoff of the Bride of Frankenstein. They kind of show her with a light blue skin, which I like. I like that theme. I think I'm going to kind of follow that with the dark hair and then the stripe through it that's either like a silver or a white or even like a light blue to match her skin, and also doing the tones on the skin to look more realistic and have some different pigments in it and that sort of thing. So a couple of things I picked up. Here are the general colors I'm kind of looking at from Tamiya to do her skin tones, and as I do them, you'll start to understand, and I'll show you. So we have some royal blue, we have some field blue, a little bit lighter, and then a light blue, which is really in the gray tone, which is kind of cool, which I think will kind of work because I'm going to do some grays on maybe the stone and possibly some of the things like that with her hair, to some highlights and that sort of thing. Another material that I bought at Michael's, this is a material, the two people that I saw were Annya was her name. I mispronounced it as Anna. Her name was Annya. And then Randy Van Dyke was doing the faces, the skin. But she was using this material from Golden called Gloss Glazing Liquid. And I was able to find it at Michael's. Basically, it helps to, it's an acrylic liquid, but it's slow drying extender for acrylic colors. So it's mainly used for like painting and things like that for acrylics, but it would also work with Tamiya's, which are acrylics, and it helps them to not dry as fast. She used it in a way to make a wash for the hair and that sort of thing. So I'll kind of show you how I do that also. So, all right. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to get her head glued onto her torso, because all of her skin, her face, and her whole body is all going to be painted the same tones and the same technique. So I don't want to do them separately. It would be easier to glue her together and do it all as one piece. I won't glue her on the base just yet, but I can glue her on there because I want to paint the base separately in different colors. So, okay. All right, so let's start working on this really cool looking figure. All right, so I did the initial dark shading, and I used royal blue from Tamiya. It's a gloss color. I didn't realize it was gloss, but it doesn't matter. By the time I'm done, this is all going to be blended in. So you can see it's pretty stark, but I went through pretty darkly along all of the lines and the folds in her skin where they would be shaded. In her neck, chest here, around her arms, even highlighting some places like around the hair where her face goes around the hair, kind of framing it, and doing around these parts too. So this is the first step that Randy Van Dyke had done, gone over and just really highlighted any areas. I tried to do, she didn't really have any creases in her face, but I did under her eyes. I did like her cheekbones, her chin line, on the sides of her nose, that sort of thing, just to give it a little bit of shading and highlighting on it. So I'll let this dry. Won't take too long to dry, and then I'll go over it with a lighter coat, sorry for the airbrush there, and blending it in. And like I said, it definitely looks stark at first, but once I get it going, and there's going to be several layers of this, that's kind of the key to it. And I wanted to start with the skin because it's going to be lighter. And then what I can do is mask off the face and do the hair. And really, other than that, the only thing I have to do is the her bra, I guess it would be, and the stitches, and then the little part at the bottom, which is some white bandages, or like an off-white kind of bandages. So, all right. And a lot of these kind of things are going to be done with washes as well. Same with their hair. So, okay. So looking pretty good so far. So let me let that set up, and then we'll go ahead and do the next step of it. All right, so I went ahead and put a blending coat over top with some light blue from Tamiya. And I can already see that's working out really, really well. You can still see the dark tones, but they're not quite so stark. And that's kind of the key to this whole process, is that you have enough detail that's deep down inside, and you just do layer after layer until you get the right look that you want. But you still maintain a lot of that darker shading in the very deepest creases, which is what you're looking to do. Now, she's not going to be blue in the end. She's going to be more of a pale, really pale flesh tone, but with a lot of blue highlights, which kind of gives you the idea that she's a reanimated corpse, which is what she is. She was dead and came back. So I really like that as a base. All right, so again, I'm gonna let that dry a little bit, and then I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna do some really fine little detailing, and I'll show you how I do that. So, and I am using my airbrush at a lower pressure. I'm down at 25 PSI right now to do these really fine lines and things like that. I may lower it even more for the next phase, which is gonna involve some really fine painting. I'll do some testing first, and then we'll go ahead and start working on that. Okay. All right, so I'm doing a little bit of testing. The next stage I want to do is I want to go over that that blue, light blue coating, blending coat, with tiny little squiggles all over the skin everywhere to just add some detail. But they have to be really thin and really fine. So I'm taking advantage of my a feature of my Renegade Chrome from Badger, where you can tighten down this little knob so it just gives you just a pull back as far as you want it to go. So I don't have to worry about worrying about it as I'm doing it. I can only go back so far, and it gives me kind of a nice little splatter effect in tiny little bits. So that's what I want to do. So let me go ahead and go over that, and this will be the next layer of detailing. So I did the next layer of it. Now, when Randy Van Dyke did his on it, he had a bigger bust. The face was like this big. It was really big, Superman. So he put a lot of little squiggly lines, but he was using like a burnt umber or something like that because he wanted it to match more of a flesh tone. So I'm using Field Blue. I just went around, and you can tell it put a lot of little speckles and almost like blemishes and things like that. And again, we're doing a harsh view now, but once I go over it with a blending coat, it will blend it all in. But you're going to see this really intricate detail underneath, which I think turned out really fantastic. I also, in the middle of it, once I went over the first time, I went back and I just left a little bit of the Field Blue in, and I added in some more thinner and some Vallejo flat red, which is kind of a bright red, to give it more of a purple tone, which I think would also be pretty cool. So then I went back over and did some more spots. I also darkened up the stitches to get them ready to go, and around her neck, because I'm going to be doing some more with those as well. And those will also get lightened up a bit whenever I do the blending coat. I really like that. So overall, right now her flesh looks really rotted and dead and disgusting, which I don't want it to ultimately be, but that's going to be a nice base coat to do some more blending over top. And at this scale, it actually did more of a little splatter and like freckles and blemishes and that sort of thing, which I think are really cool. So, okay. So again, let that dry a bit, and then I'm going to go over with one more blending coat. I'm trying to think of what I'm going to do. I may just start doing the flesh part now, but make it really pale so a lot of this detail still stays coming through. So, okay. right, so I went over the whole figure with some Model Masters sand, which is a much lighter kind of a flesh than using flesh tones. So definitely brought it back towards the flesh tones look. You can still see a lot of the detail, like the bluish and the speckles underneath. Still not quite as light as I want it to be, but I don't want to go too light because it's going to contrast off of her hair and her eyes and her lips and that kind of thing. But what I think I'll do is I'll just mist over very lightly with some flat white, just to kind of bring up a little more of those colors, make it a little lighter to what I want it to be. I also put a little bit of weathering powders into some of the spots, like the burnt blue, a little bit of burnt red, some snow, some white, just to kind of accent some of those too. So, okay, but just about done with the skin part, and try to get it to the right tone that I want it to be. All right, so I misted over some very light misting of flat white over the figure to go ahead and just lighten that up just a slight bit, but still quite a bit of detail, especially when you look closely into it, coming through, and highlights within the dark creases and folds and things of that nature. So now I know ultimately I went from blank figure to really stark looks to back to looking like all one color, but that's kind of the idea. I'm only doing the flesh. I'm not doing anything else right now. So when I do her bra and the stitches, and obviously her face, because she'll have a lot of painting on her face with her lips, her eyes, her eyebrows, her eyelashes are dark, and then I get like this band painted in her hair and everything else. It's going to really bring it together and make it look right. But I don't want it to be a stark image, but there still is quite a lot of color within the different places that I want it to be, and that was the idea. All right, and I also went ahead and painted the base initially, so I just did some flat black in all the cracks, and then I went back over it with a light gray to give that a kind of a cool look for stone, and I'll still do some more weathering. All of these are just the base colors for the flesh and the base. I'm still going to do a whole lot more things. So I think at this point now I'm probably going to mask off her face around where the hair is, and I'm going to go ahead and start painting the hair and getting the base color on the hair as well. All right, so here was another tip from Annya when she was doing her figures. Somebody had asked how she masks off her figures, and she said she just uses silly putty. So I picked some up at Michael's. It was only $1.99 for this little egg of it. And it is really quite cool because it doesn't really pull off any of the paint or stick to anything, but it goes in and molds wherever you want it to be. So I molded it around the hair because it's an odd shape. And then when I got down to here, I just didn't want to waste any more, so I just put tape over her face. So now the hair is all segmented, so now I can go ahead and paint that and not worry about getting any on her face. And then, so that works pretty good. And let's go ahead and get that done. We'll see how that turns out. All right, so I painted the main colors onto her hair. I started off with a dark gray, as I showed previously, and I let that fully dry. And I also went over, just airbrushed lightly some white over the little stripes on either side. Then I went back over it once it dried, and I want to have just basically a blue tone. With her skin being a pale blue and close to pale blue, I'm still not quite happy with the skin. I'm going to work on that some more, but I want to have a lot of blue tones sticking out, coming out. I'm thinking about painting the insides of her bra the royal blue, and then these little rib parts are supposed to be silver or some kind of metallic, so I'm going to do that. And also with her makeup is really obvious as far as like her eyeshadow and her eyebrows and her lips are an odd color, so I might do like a navy blue on that as well, just to bring it out. So I went back over and I just lightly misted on first some of the navy blue, then some of the field blue, and then finally some of the light blue, and I just misted it. So I didn't do it on heavily, so it doesn't stand out as being blue, but it has blue highlights, which is what I'm looking for. So that way, once I get some other blues on here, it will get that color to pop. And I'm not done with the hair yet either. I'm going to try one more technique that she mentioned with a wash. Another thing that she did talk about, which I also have been doing, is between each of the main layers, not necessarily the colors, but between like this layer, which is all acrylics airbrushed on, she did a spray of dull coat, just Tester's dull coat, just to seal it in. Because it's an enamel, it'll protect those colors. So the next stage I'm going to do is going to involve a wash. When I'm going to be putting it on, I could rub off certain spots, and you don't want to do that. So therefore, you just go back and protect it with a dull coat. It seals it all in, and that way whatever else I do, it's not going to affect it. So it's always a pretty good idea when it comes to that. So let me go ahead and get that ready, and then I'll show you how I'm going to do the next part of the hair, and then we'll go back to the skin part. All right, so I filmed some scenes using this material that Annya had used. It's called Golden Gloss Glazing Liquid. Basically, it's an acrylic extender. You can add it into acrylic paints to it extends them so they don't dry out as quick. What she used it for was she mixed it in, I believe it was like 50-50 with some alcohol and some of this, thinned it out a bit, and then she put in just a little bit of color and made it into a wash, and she added into the hair. So I did try that on the figure, and like I said, I filmed it, but I ended up not liking it, so I went over it again, which I'll show you here in a moment. But it doesn't work as well on the darker, because it's like a wash, and it works better on lighter things so that the darkness goes into the details. So it worked really well when she used it with blonde hair or red hair or lighter tones to go in and fill in the details, and then augment the lighter colors that she used. But it doesn't really work well with darker, so when I put it on, it basically just looked really dark over the whole thing and just blended it back to one color. So I went ahead and just went over it again with some different colors in order to bring it back to some different tones. So let me go ahead and show you that instead. All right, and there we go. So I went ahead and put on some different shades and colors again, took it back to where I wanted it to be. And like I said, I can still do more. The nice thing about this is that you want to do a lot of layers. Layers are very important. And they're easy to do on something like a figure because you have a lot of really, really deep detail, like in her hair. Her skin is pretty smooth. So you're not really going to run into a problem of ruining a lot of detail by putting multiple layers of paint. But that looks a lot better, and I like how her hair has some different layers and some frosts and things. There's a little bit of gloss in it still, so we'll see. I may bring that down with a flat coat. I may bring it down with some weathering powders. But for now, I'm going to call that done, and I'm not going to paint any more on her hair at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and remove the silly putty, and I'm going to take a look at her skin and see what I want to do with that. The main issue I had, and you can see that I sanded a few little bits, is that there's some really rough spots on her skin that came out a lot more obvious once I got it painted. I'm kind of happy with that color, and you know, with some of the detail and that sort of thing, that looks pretty cool. But I definitely want to sand down some of the rough spots and then go back and do a little bit more real close detailing with the airbrush, and then some overall blending again. So, but definitely starting to come together, and you can see some of the colors starting to play off of each other, which I really like. So, okay. All right, so after I did some more sanding on the flesh, I went ahead and did some more highlights in the various creases with the royal blue. And then I went over it with the light blue again. And then I went back over and once again added in all the little specks when I reduced the airbrush, down to actually a little less than 15 psi. It was more like 12 psi. So it was barely coming out, it was just sputtering. Did some blue, I did some, I mixed in some more of the red into the blue. So I used a royal navy first, and then I went back and used some red in it and made it kind of a, well, you can see it's mostly red, a little bit purple, and I also did the stitches and those kind of things. All right, so I was debating about what color to put over it. I don't really want to do a light blue again, but I realized that when I did the sand, it looked like it was kind of a light blue. So I'm debating about whether or not I want to do flesh, because I didn't really like the color. That's why I went ahead and put some white over it, because I think the sand was too pale. So let me kind of play with it. I might do some tests on my little paper there and see what I want to do, and then put another blending coat over the whole thing. But I just want to do something real light so all of this detail will still be visible. She just won't be, you know, as dark and rotted looking as she is now. I'm not going for a zombie. I'm going for a more realistic flesh tone. So, okay. All right, so she's definitely starting to take shape and come down to the tones that I want her to be. I definitely have leaned more towards the lighter blue for her flesh, but lots of flesh tones in it. So I did go over, after the last one that I showed with all the dark specks and the kind of really dead looking flesh, I went back over with some flesh, first of all, flat flesh, lightly. And each of these I thinned out really, really strongly, like maybe 60% thinner and 40% paint. So it was a nice, really thin spray. And that was, it did give it some more of a flesh color, but then I took some sand and went over that to lighten it up just a bit. And then the last photos I showed, you can still see a lot of detail, but I wasn't happy with the color, so I mixed just a little bit of light blue and white and just mist it over that. Again, really thinned out. And then to bring back some of that detail, I took some royal blue and I thinned it out really, really thin. So it was just barely coming out at all, like you can see. Yeah, like right down there, how thin it was. and I just went back and took the pressure down to about 12 psi and just did some of the highlighting in the creases again. And then I made a thicker version of the royal blue, and I just went through and just speckled it. You can just barely see like some freckling and speckling and that kind of thing. So did a little bit of highlighting above her eyes, like her eyeshadow, a little bit more really light contouring of her cheekbones, that kind of thing. All right. So it takes a lot of steps and a lot of layers. So far, the effect that I really like the best is reducing the airbrush pressure down really low to about 15 psi or lower. Just letting it sputter and getting a lot of little speckles coming out. I think I'll do one more pass with just slightly add a little bit of red to the blue. I still want to keep it in that bluish range, but it's looking really good as far as that. I'm probably going to have to do some type of a semi-gloss on it to give her more of a skin tone look. I'll kind of play with that. I might even try some of the glossing liquid. We'll see. I would have to brush that on, but I probably want to seal it in with a flat coat first, just to keep the paints from being blended in or anything. So, but definitely starting to look the way I want her to look. Getting the really pale blue, but a lot of the little darker speckles, and she does look like she has dead flesh, but it's not as zombie looking, that kind of thing. So all right, so looking really awesome. I did go back and add a little bit of red to the some Vallejo red into the royal blue, and did some little red speckles, which you can kind of make out there just to add some extra tones. I also again went back and highlighted the stitches in that reddish tone. And what I'm probably going to do is dry brush some white on the actual stitches, so the red is down inside, sort of like it's a sewed up wound, which it kind of is as well. But I did realize something. I was kind of confusing some of the steps that I saw Randy Van Dyke do for the skin, mainly because the one step that involved the little squiggly lines all over it was a little tricky to try to do with the airbrush. I mean, if I practice some more with the really low pressures, I probably could do it. But let me kind of go over the steps again. So basically, you go through first of all with the dark color, and you just highlight all of the creases and seams, any place where, you know, like her shoulder blades and that sort of thing, and under her cheekbones, where that's going to stay dark. Then you blend it in with the color you want. Most of the time it would be like a flesh color. In this case, I wanted it to be more of a blue tone, so I used the light blue. Then you go back and you add more obvious detail. In the case with him was the little squiggles all over the entire thing, to add some randomness and detail, which I did a lot of with the lower pressure and putting some like pock marks and things like that over it. But then the next step would be you would blend that in again, and then you would go back over with the low pressure freckling and adding those kind of things. So those are two separate steps. I kind of did those together, and then I blended it in, and I got rid of a lot of those freckles. So the freckles should be there. They shouldn't be blended over. So I did that after the fact, once I put on the flesh tones and the blues and things, so that she would have those obvious blemishes and freckles within the colors. So in her case, it's mostly blue, but you can see that there are some tones of flesh in there. There's obviously the various little speckles and the highlights in certain places, like in the creases of her skin and that sort of thing. But you can see it there, just how awesome that looks. And you can make out close up the little purple and the blue and the various speckles and the different colors. But when you move back, it just blends together as a more natural skin. So your eye sees it as a more natural skin, or in her case, a more realistic blue tone for her skin. So the last thing I did, which I found a really good use for the gloss glazing liquid, I could have sprayed over, because I didn't like the flat to her skin. And this is something else he mentioned, that skin isn't flat, it's kind of a slight semi-gloss. but skin is moist, and you know, if they're sweating, obviously, that kind of thing. But skin isn't a flat look, it just doesn't look right. So I didn't want to do, I first sealed it with a flat coat, a dull coat, to keep all the paints in so I wouldn't rub them off. And then I took the gloss glazing liquid and I just put it in this little container. And again, I thinned it down just with some alcohol. I just used some isopropyl alcohol right here. I don't think it matters what strength or whatever. It's just to thin it out a bit, and it'll dissolve. And then I just took just a little bit of light blue, put it in there just to kind of give it some more of that tone. But it's just a really thin wash. And then I just used this cheap brush that I got and just brushed it over instead of airbrushing it. This stuff's a little thick. I don't know if I'd want to try to airbrush it. It might clog up my airbrush, but it definitely gave that more very subtle or supple flesh-like look rather than being a flat tone. So I really like that. And then that's pretty much dried at this point, because this stuff is gloss. It's a gloss glazing liquid. So I'm real happy with how she looks. I'm not going to do anything more with her skin right now. I'm just going to let that fully dry, and then I'm going to go back in and start masking off like her bra and getting that painted, her little bolts in her neck. Let me get and work on those, and then once I get those in, that'll kind of pop out some of these colors, and I can take all this off and just see how that all blends together. And then that'll tell me what I need to do as far as finishing up the other details, like her eyes and her lips, her eyebrows, the eyeshadow above her eyes, that kind of thing. So, all right, but looking pretty fantastic. All right, so quite a bit of detailing on my charged figure. I showed a lot of stills rather than stopping with each part of it. So as you saw, I used silly putty to mask off the bra. I painted it the royal blue. Then I went ahead and used some Tamiya weathering powders, the silver, to highlight or to rub on the detailing around it, the ribbing, which came out nicely. I put a flat coat on it. It kind of thinned out some of the silver, so I put it back on again. And I have that going all the way around the bra. Clasp on the back. All right. The bottom was supposed to be bandages. I had already before airbrushed some white on it, so I just took a little bit of flesh and thinned it out quite a bit, and just kind of put a little bit of wash in there to make it look more like some bandages. Her stitches, I used flat white and lightly dry brushed the stitches themselves, just to leave the red underneath them, which I think look pretty cool. The bolts on her neck, I used the Alclad's gloss black because it's nice and shiny. Let that dry completely, and then I also rubbed on the silver Tamiya weathering powders, which I think turned out really nicely. Gave it a really nice silver sheen to those. And then I started painting her face. So the first thing I did was I used some burnt blue, And I just applied it on just like eyeshadow around her eyes and under her eyelids. I used the royal blue for her lips. Then I went ahead and painted flat black on her eyebrows and eyelashes. And then I painted her earrings the navy blue as well to kind of match. And then just lightly used the little dab end of the burnt blue to slightly highlight under her cheekbones, just to accent them. It's really cool because the little applicator is just like a makeup applicator. So in a way, I'm applying her makeup. Using that little tip right there. It's really cool. So it's just like putting her makeup on, which I think is pretty cool. But I think it's definitely coming together and she's starting to really look pretty awesome and beautiful. And the face is really pulling it all together. So, all right, a little bit more to do. And then her eyes, which I always leave to last because that's always the hardest part for me. So just about ready to wrap this figure up. All right, so I just used a couple of light grays to dry brush over the stone pedestal. Give it a little more character. I'm gonna let that dry and then see if I want to do anything as far as like a dark wash. I probably don't need to because the cracks are nice and dark underneath because I pre-shaded it with black before I did anything. So I think that looks pretty cool and pretty realistic. And it's just supposed to be a stone base. It's not supposed to have any other elements involved in it, but I think it's pretty cool. So, all right. All right, so I got the eyes painted and I'm really happy with those. It took about 3 tries to get that to work out the way I wanted it to. So I followed some advice from some different people, primarily from Augie Gonzalez. He suggested, well, a couple of things. First of all, he suggests that you put the pupil a little bit up towards the top of the eyeball rather than in the center. Otherwise, I think it makes it look like they're surprised if you don't. He also suggested, well, first of all, paint it with just a slightly off-white. So I used an ivory color for the white part of the eye. Then I went back in and you just take your thinnest little tiny brush. Come on. I used a couple of thin brushes. And you just put a little black dot right where you want the pupil to be, just to make sure you get it centered. And if you mess up, you just, wipe it off or paint over it and do it again. So then you get the eye centered. Once you get that centered, let that dry. Then you can go ahead and put on the color of the pupil, or not the pupil, the iris, and then use the black dot as a center. So I did that, and then I used some clear blue, and I put that over top, and you want to keep that nice and rounded. And again, up towards the top of the eyeball rather than just in the center. And then I let that dry. And then you just take your lightest tip and you put the black pupil, again, sort of just up a little bit in the center of the iris. And you got to make sure that that's the right proportion to the rest of the iris. So the pupil has to be the right amount. Again, if it's too small, it looks like they're surprised or shocked. If it's too big, it doesn't look right. And then you let that dry, and then you just take the tiniest bit of white and put that little teeny reflective little teeny piece, and I put it to the upper left. You just want to make sure that they're both in the same place. So I think she turned out fantastically. She looks quite beautiful. The eyes really, really make this figure for sure. All right, so I'm very happy. Let me go ahead and put this on a nicer background, and we'll take some final shots. All right, and there she is, looking really quite beautiful. Really happy with those skin tones. And a lot of lessons I learned from these painting techniques that I tried. One of the most important was to not hyper focus on the skin tone and thinking it should look exactly as it should at the end, because it has to be matching up with the hair and the eyes and the lips and the other parts of the body and the base and everything else. So when I was done with it, it looked kind of dull and bland, but in the end it looks great, and all the blues are popping and coming out the way they're supposed to, as far as picking up those colors. So if I tried to make the skin look how I wanted it to be, it probably wouldn't have worked right with everything else. So you've just got to be patient. And sometimes, like I did, it's best to paint some of the other parts like the hair and the bra and kind of get an idea of what's going on before you finish up with the rest of it, so you know that it all blends together. So I'm really happy with that. A lot of good, really awesome skin speckles and different shadings. So really happy with that process of lowering the pressure on my air compressor, and then using the backstop on my airbrush. So really happy with that. I think that worked really well. I really want to work on a figure with real flesh tones in the future to be able to use this same technique, but I think it turned out great. A lot of the techniques, well, similar techniques I use for the hair as well. It's harder with the darker, as I said, because to use the wash techniques that she used and that sort of thing to add more color into a lighter color doesn't really work with the dark. But I think it turned out nicely. Happy with the with how the eyes turned out. And I really like the overall blending of the colors and the blues that bring out the overall figure. So, okay, so fantastic, really happy with this, and I had a lot of fun playing with these techniques and definitely want to do more of these in the future. Okay. All right, so fantastic. So my first build completed after Wonderfest, getting my builds ready for next year. I'm not really thinking that far ahead. I just wanted to get work on this and do some of the flesh tones. So really happy with how that turned out. Really love those techniques. So I definitely highly recommend trying some of these out. And I will be doing more of these in the future when I work on some figures that have realistic flesh tones, and doing some of the same thing as far as the freckles and the blemishes and the different highlighting with darker colors underneath. So really happy with how this turned out. So stay tuned. I will be, I already started and I'll be continuing working on my discovery build now that I have my airbrush compressor again. And I have a video for that. I'll show you in the next video that I show. And so I can start doing some more painting on the ship itself. All right, thanks to all my new subscribers, and I will see you next time.